everybody! I'm here today to talk to you about squeaking car brakes. I want you to look at these things first. If your car brakes are squeaking, screeching, or even squealing, okay? Because those are three distinctively separate sounds. So look at these things first because these might be the root of the problem that you're experiencing. Number one, the age of the brakes. So basically, as your brakes get older, they're going to be less effective. And as they become less effective, they're going to be more likely to make these weird sounds. So if your brakes are old, even if you haven't driven the car in 5 years, but the brakes are 5 years old, definitely something to look at because there's probably a whole bunch of accumulation of stuff on the brakes or the rotors if they're old, and that's going to cause them potentially to make the screeching or squeaking or squealing sounds. Okay, I'm going to refer to all those sounds as just squeaking from now on, but really that's what I'm referring to, all three. Number two, the thickness of the pads. Now, in most modern brake pads, there is going to be a wear indicator, which is just a tiny little piece of metal that when your brakes get down to like the sort of bare minimum that they should be at, this starts making a sound because the metal scrapes against the rotor, okay? And that's just only meant to be there to kind of, one, not to really annoy you, but to let you know that you got to replace the brakes soon. It gives you an audible indicator, an audio indicator that you can hear that you got to be replacing your brakes soon, okay? So look at the thickness of the pads. Generally speaking, they should be at least 1/4 of an inch thick. If they're less than 1/4 of an inch, definitely you got to look at replacing them. A quarter of an inch is sort of the minimum that you want to be at when you sort of, before you're like, okay, I got to replace them ASAP. Number three, the conditions of the rotors. Look at the condition of the rotors. If your rotors are all roughed up and scratched, then they either have to be replaced or resurfaced. So if your rotors are, if you didn't resurface them yet, you can likely resurface the rotors once because they're thick enough to handle that most of the time. But if they're really thin or you've already resurfaced them, you probably got to replace them. Look at the overall condition of the rotors. Number four, is there an obstruction in the brake area? Sometimes there's a tiny little pebble that gets kicked up and caught somewhere in the brakes that will cause a screeching sound. To be honest with you, even if there is a decent sized piece of dust caught under the brake pads, it could cause a screeching sound because that dust will attract dirt, and that when that piece of dust ends up being dirty and it's sort of stuck down to the brake pads, it'll create that screeching sound. Now the good thing about something like dust is that it'll work itself out. Something like a pebble hopefully will work itself out too, but like I said, you want to definitely look into that. Maybe if you notice that there's something in there and it continually makes that screeching sound for a couple days longer, bring it to a mechanic and then they can take a look at it. But at least you'll know potentially what the root of the problem is. Number five is, are your brakes loosely mounted? If you just got your brakes installed recently and they're making a screeching sound, okay, you know that pretty much all of those other factors are not going to be the case. You know, they're not going to be old. The thickness of them is going to be good. The rotors are going to be good. There's probably not going to be an obstruction in them because you just got them mounted, okay? But maybe they mounted them loosely. If your brakes or any aspect of the brakes, whether it's the clips, the pads, anything about them, if they're mounted a little too loosely, it might cause an intermittent screeching sound. The screeching sound probably won't be there all the time, but it'll be there from time to time. So bring them back to the mechanic and just say, listen, the brakes are screeching. They might tell you it's normal, and that's fine. If they say it's normal and they tell you to drive around for a couple more days, see if it goes away, then do that. But if the problem persists, then go back there. Because if they installed it, chances are they're going to be able to figure out what the problem is. And it might not be their fault. Maybe the brakes are faulty. The actual part is faulty, but have them look into it if you just replaced them recently, because they might be mounted a little too loosely if you replace them recently. Number six, uneven wear. Now this happens from time to time. It's a rare occurrence, but sometimes your brakes are worn unevenly. And if that's the case, then you have to get them all replaced. Like, you never want to replace just one brake pad, even if, or even just two, like even just one side of the car. Even if they're worn unevenly, you're gonna have to replace them all. But, you know, you have to speak to a professional because they're gonna determine whether or not your car is still safe to drive with, because they might be unevenly worn by just a tiny bit and it'll sort of even out over time. Or they might be unevenly worn by a significant amount, and if that's the case, then, you know, they're going to say, like, okay, you got to get them replaced now. So with that being said, those are 6 reasons why your brakes might be squealing, screeching, or even squeaking, and you got to look at those things first. There can actually be other reasons why, but you want to look look into those things first to see what the root of the problem is. That's it. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you think down below as a comment. And of course, be sure to subscribe for more great videos just like this one. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching.